Steve Hatwood.
You have a seat. We'll get started. How you doing? How you doing in Atlanta? Oh yeah, I got me down here.
Y'all, how are you doing? Oh my God, I pray. I'm telling you what, so good to see you. Oh my gosh, y'all, I'm telling you what, that's just like, I know really, y'all, I mean, you know, I stressed so much. Hey, I took the bar this week. Yeah. But 25 years after I took my first one, I'm so glad that I took the job when I did.
Hey, Jack.
Yes, sir. Hey, Carl.
This is Carl. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Hey, Carl. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to talk garbage.
You know, when it's trash, I'm glad you always think of me.
Yeah. I'll call you next week. Seriously.
All right, talk to you later on. Yeah.
Okay, all right, all right.
I love that. Excuse me, Jerry.
You're fine, thank
What do you eat, Brian?
Bread sandwich.
You didn't bring it up for the rest of the class?
I could send a piece of bread around.
It looks good. What is it?
It's walnut raisin whole wheat.
Cool. Oh, that looks good.
It is good. I
That's
love
too
bread.
healthy for us.
Sorry, I didn't see you back there.
Yeah, you do live in Asheville.
Because y'all floated away.
Group there.
Right.
I did cut my dreadlocks though, so.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Tony.
A friend of mine's down there. Is it still there?
Center on the world. Carl's on the phone, Lordy, and all.
Good to see you. I appreciate your well wishes.
Up in space, that love that number.
I know it's right.
Hey, dude. How you doing, buddy?
I was watching the, I was looking at okay, well, thank you anyway.
They had not met through water. They get through next year. And now, you have to just thank y'all.
For a second, I thought you were.
I mean, it's really bad.
I know.
We've had a lot of rain. Up in my woods, it's like a sponge. I was up
He
there
still
last
wanted
night
to-
doing something, and your feet just sink down this much. It's just like a tissue.
That was 6 and going to the house. Hey, Joseph.
You just get out there. I feel the compassion.
And our work on the dog.
We, I know we
Tell Maria. It's good.
morning and welcome to the regular meeting of the Area Authority, the Western Highlands Area Authority. Glad each one of you here. Hope your day's going well so far, and when you leave, please have a safe journey back to your office or back to your home. Thank you for being here. Next item on the agenda would be public comments. Mr. Jerry Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good to see y'all again. Seems like yous are getting fewer at the table. Anyway, hope you had a good weekend. October 1st is coming fast. That's when the leaves start falling, you know. And there's going to be some other things falling. I'm concerned about some things. I see that you're very in-depth in financial concerns, and I think you should be. But I see that the non-financial things, to me, are just as important, and I think you all do. But we need to be in the people business and serving the people. And the people I serve is a lot to do with school. And I was encouraged by the Medicaid, Mr. what's his name, Dave Richards. I was encouraged by his comments with the CFAC that they're going to be looking at school issues related to the things that I've been talking to y'all about. The thing I'd like to bring to your attention that I think needs to get started on right now would be a great help to the parents that we serve and the people in general. The care coordinators with Smokey and the care coordinators with Western Highlands seem to be two different kinds of people. You talk to one, you hear different policies, different kinds of things that absolutely seems like right the reverse of what we've been used to. So I'm proposing that there be some, on the consumer side, when you go on to Smokey or Western Highlands, or whichever way it can be done, is to give some way of parents and adults to be able to access what they are expected of or what to be looking at, because when they get in these meetings that I've been in, I am absolutely not confused but concerned, because I think I can sort it out pretty quick, but for a parent, they're not getting the information in a way, because when you have people sitting in the room from Smokey or from other agencies that represents from Smokey, and they can't even agree between themselves, and they have to go back to get the answer, that's a concern to me. So I just think if we could have something put on the web where parents or adults of the people we serve, that they could kind of see what care coordinators do and focus it into parent language, they could understand, I think it'd be a big help. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. There's no provider comments. No one signed up for provider comments. But before we go any further, I want the board to consider the following changes to the agenda you have in front of you. As we get ready to down item 6, we'll move it to item 10, item 7 to item 6, item 8 to item 7, item 9 to item 8, and item 10 to item 11. I apologize. Sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, 10 will remain.
10 will become 9, I believe.
10 becomes 9, and
6 becomes 10.
6 becomes 10. And then 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 remain the same. Idea. You just keep up with it, we'll be fine. Is there a motion that we make these changes? So moved.
Second.
All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we will continue with the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda with the noted changes? Got a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Any other questions or concerns? All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. So the next item up is going to be Sandy, if you'll come up for the consumer, I'm sorry, Nancy, will you come for the Consumer and Family Advisory Committee report?
Good morning. We have some empty faces here. I'm sure everybody's really busy trying to get caught up. We held a really good CFAC meeting a few weeks ago. We had Dave Richards who came, unexpected. We got late notice that he would be there, but we knew he at some point would be attending our CFAC. And we gave him about an hour and a half to answer questions. Of course, some of the questions, I think, left him stunned, couldn't answer them. Kind of sat there and went, okay, can we go on to the next one? But we were pretty strong and said, nope, you gotta answer our questions. And I want to thank Jerry Rice for being there and recording it and took down all the information that we did get. And there were a lot of questions he could not answer, which was concerning, but he's going to go back and hopefully get the answers for us and get back with us. And most of us felt better when we left, thinking that this was going to work. Some concerns with, was brought to CFAC with concerns about some of the interviews and the way this was being handled between Western Highlands and Smoky. And I understand that there were phone calls made and no messages left and no appointments made, and I think they finally got that straightened out. But that's a real big concern for a lot of us IDD parents. When I talk to my care coordinator, he gets a phone call from somebody for an interview, no message left, no name, why they're calling, going to schedule you for an appointment, goes on to the next phone call, and he's almost at the end of the road, or time, and he hasn't even gotten a call. So, that's a big concern for a lot of us IDD parents out there, because we depend on these care coordinators. So, anyway, there was a lot of questions, a lot of answers, I think, and CFAC is still trying to move forward to figure out where we're going to go. We have a list of concerns that I'm going to be talking with Mr. Vines about at some point today, and let him know what CFAC would like to do here. What we're hoping that we'll be able to coordinate this budget and get some approval. We'll all start working forward, making this joint effort work. Hopefully. Any questions?
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the provider advisory group report. Sandy, come forward.
Good morning.
Morning.
Like a lot of people might be on vacation. I have a pretty brief report for you this morning. As I talked about last month, we have followed through with our combining of the Western Highlands Provider Group with the Smoky Mountain Center Provider Group. We met together as a combined entity about 2 weeks ago, and that was a very large meeting. There's a lot of us, but the Smoky Group pretty much accepted what the Western Highlands Group had proposed in terms of we're having a simple combining of our groups at this point. The Western Highlands Provider Committee members are joining subcommittees on the Smoky Group, and we will function as one group during this transition period. And then at the annual fall retreat of the Smoky Mountain Center Provider Network Council, we will together come up with the new bylaws and what the new combined entity will look like. So, so far so good. That's been the bulk of what our work has been, is just bringing those two groups together, getting updates about how they function and starting to work together. So that process has been as smooth as it probably could have been. So I think the Smoky Mountain Center Network Council has some experience combining groups, and so that's kind of helped them feel comfortable with this process. So that's really all I have to report today. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the fourth share report. Just a couple things. One of them is should have been looked at a good while back, but it had to run its course in Raleigh. Senate Bill 223, where we requested the authority to waive or change 122C, 118.1 about allowing severance pay moved expenses to a CEO or MCO, CEO when they're hired. So that is in play now, and that will benefit any other MCO or LME across the state if they lose a director to be able to take a look at severance pay and moving expenses for them. That was passed in this session. And the other thing is a delay of both Smoky Mountain and Western Highlands from having to change its board composition until 30 days after the merger is complete or the end of April of 2014. So that gives us, so we'll all going to remain intact until such time as the merger is complete and then we move forward there. So those are two important bills that were never done, and you'll hear a little bit more about those a little later on when Mr. Ingram gives his report. The executive committee did not meet last month. The transition team did meet with Smokey's board and had discussion about different things that most of it had to do with the closeout and the transition, projected timeline and stuff. And I'm not going to go much into that because that's going to be covered here just a few minutes later. So that's all I have for my report today. The next item on the agenda, we're going to go into closed session. Hopefully it will not be a very long closed session, but I'm going to read this motion for closed session on August the 2nd, 2013 regular meeting. Move to go into closed session pursuant to subsections 143.318.11, brackets A, bracket 3, and bracket 6 of the General Statutes of North Carolina to consult with the attorney in order to preserve the attorney-client privilege and to consider personnel matters. So is there a motion we go into closed session?
So moved.
The second. Second. Any questions from anyone? All in favor, indicate saying aye. Aye. Thank you. We won't be very
I just
long.
went on and did the next thing, right?
Like everyone's back. Thank y'all for your patience with us there for a moment. At this time, I'll turn over to Steve to make a couple of motions he's going to make this morning.
First motion is to seal the minutes for the closed session just completed, to withhold such closed session minutes from public inspection so long as the public inspection would frustrate the purpose or the purposes thereof.
Is there a second for that motion? Second. Thank you, Joe. All right. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries.
There are two on the phone.
There are two people on the
I just
phone.
wanted to double check. Okay.
Are there
Carl,
two
you
awake
there?
on the phone?
Yes.
Okay, and Carl and Artie both are there. Okay. Okay, second motion.
As far as the regular minutes, I move to approve the minutes for March 12th special meeting and July 11th special meeting.
We've got a motion to approve the March 12th special meeting and the July 11th special meeting. Is there a second to that motion? Second. Okay, thank you, Jim. Any other questions, concerns? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn next item over to Mr. Ingram, the Smoky Mountain Center Western Highlands Network Chief Executive Officer report.
Okay. Well, we're going to find a good way to blend together a lot of these agenda items. So, you know, what order they actually occur in is gonna, I guess, be pretty flexible actually, but let me just kind of go through especially A, B, D, and F. That really all kind of fit together in some way, shape, or manner. With the reduction in force plan, and I should explain, normally we would have Nancy Ford here today, our HR director, and she had some terrible news last Friday in terms of an accident that her husband suffered, and fortunately he's finally kind of stabilized. He's been over at Mission Hospital, and Christina is going to be the HR director this morning and kind of explain a little bit about that RIF plan. I'll just warn you, we got bad news and good news with that. The bad news is we're not on schedule with where we thought we would be, but the good news is we're ahead of schedule. So you can't complain too much about that. And really, that's just it is where we knew we would be at some point in terms of this whole transition, establishment of the organization chart, and the whole hiring process that was underway. And then the closeout items, timelines A and B. Of course, we talked, and we have pretty much every month here, about the activities that would be responsible to close out all of the Western business. And that's, we have this simultaneous effort along with all of the work that's part of the transition to create one consolidated entity. We have to kind of keep our eye on the Western Highlands ball that is finishing all that business, that in some ways ends October 1st, but it really just goes to another phase, because there'll be a lot of activities past that point that'll have to be undertaken. And we wanted to make a very deliberate presentation to you about all of those activities and what's involved with that, and Steve Wood will handle that. As part of that, of course, is the question of what to do about the employees that will be dedicated to those activities. And we talked about this quite a bit on Monday. There's really two options there. You know, they have to either be Western employees or they have to be Smoky employees. And you know, we can talk a little bit more about that when we get into it. And then one of the major activities that we'll have, you know, really beginning now, I think, is the point where we'll really want to get into this, is the creation of a merger agreement. And whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, the General Assembly passed a bill, Senate Bill 208, and it's kind of popularly referred to as the red flag bill, that lays out a lot of the framework for how this sort of activity is to occur. So there's a lot in there that we want to explain today, and Allison and Tara will both kind of go together on that. That really creates the framework for a lot of the big issues around what happens and how it happens. So that'll kind of lead us to the point where, you know, we'll be ready to go into that merger agreement. So I guess it makes the most sense. Why don't we start with the RIF plan, Christina?
Okay. Good morning, everyone, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Welcome. What you have in your packet are three documents that I'm going to reference. One is the current copy of the reduction in force plan that is the Western Highlands policy, and the manner in which the agency established a framework to deal with reduction in force. And so we wanted to just make sure, one of the things that Brian had asked Nancy Ford to do, and I've been overseeing that, is to ensure that the current policy has been followed and is in place, which we wanted to make sure you saw that and just connect a couple of dots. So you have that policy. You may remember, and hopefully do remember, that as we have been doing this process, what I'm here today to talk to you about is just where we are in this point in time. Over the last 12 to 13 weeks, each month we've been coming and talking about where we are in personnel And, you know, the processes that are in place. So here we are in the 1st of August talking about RIF, which is where we should be, where you should want us to be. And I want to just give a little definition of the word RIF, reduction in force. For this particular conversation today, as you well know, this is about categories of people. We do have people on the Western Highlands staff who have opted not to pursue employment. That has been their personal choice. I can tell you that from a personnel perspective, that there have been lots of conversations. These employees have asked a lot about their severance package. You know, what does this mean? I think this is where I am in my life. I was planning on probably leaving at some point in the future. So there's a category of people within the reduction in force that just chose not to have a job. And we have, of course, that always raised some flags, and I believe Nancy Ford, prior to this past week, did a lot of work with those employees to absolutely make sure that that is what they truly wanted to do. And I believe we feel good about that. The next category within this definition are people who would like to retire. And we saw Charlie give you, his announcement last month. And there were several people that you were probably very aware of in the agency that are eligible to retire and that would like to retire. And that process has been put in place for those individual people. And then the third category is sort of where we are today overall with staff. As you may remember, the last time I spoke with you, we have about 600 hours of interviews that are being taken place, and I am very proud to tell you, and Brian said we are ahead of schedule. You may have heard me last month say that we think that that would probably take about to the middle of August or so, and we believe that we will have about 95% of all interviews done by close of business today. And the few that are left is probably less than 10 or 15 at the most based on the numbers that I got this morning. So we are way ahead, and part of that is what staff, the hiring managers have done. I've helped them to have priorities to make, people have been interviewing 10, 12 hours a day. And so, and the few that are left are for logistic reasons, either for them or either just the manner in which, the process has been going on. And again, I think it's always very important to remember, yesterday I looked at an employee who applied for 7 jobs. And that particular employee has completed 7 interviews as of yesterday. We have employees that will be given 1 choice, 2 choices. In one situation I saw yesterday, a choice of 3 jobs. 3 people would like for them to come. We look at the current employee's salary. We look at the salary based on years of experience in the state application process, and we come up with a salary that that person would be offered. So again, I just want to reiterate, within this rift, there are categories. So this third category, why I'm kind of reminding you of where we are today, is that we won't know the complete number of how many people that will fall into the rift category until we have, most likely, like I said, just about complete all the interviews today. Then we'll do the process of doing the offer letters and the people's choices and talking with all those employees. And once we get through that whole process, my new timeline is that would be in about 2.5 weeks at the most. I'd really like to think it could be done in a week, but it's just the numbers of people and getting up with people. So, and so that final number that I'm sure many of you are interested in is how many are going to actually be RIF'd based on those definitions of that concept. We will not know, I would say, for about another 2 weeks to all staff make their final decisions and where they want to be and the jobs they would like to be offered and that they would like to accept. So, and that I think it's important because RIF never makes people feel good when you say that word. And so I've always felt here in the last couple of weeks I need to define what that really means in regard to the policy and the categories and who will fall into that. A piece of your RIF policy for Western Highlands was amended back on May 22nd, which is a single piece of paper you have in your packet, and you should be very familiar with that at this point. And this was what you as a board decided to offer to employees, and it's called the Employee Retention Bonus Guidelines. So again, just connecting the dots. Okay, so that is still in place, and employees are of course very interested and continue to be very appreciative of that retention bonus they will receive, and we understand, hopefully by now you understand the criteria of who will get that and who would not be eligible. So what is most important today in this conversation is in the Western Highlands RIF plan, it states that we must give each employee who is going to be RIF'd a 30-day notice. And so today what you have is you have a copy of the reduction in force policy that Nancy Ford has created. We did review this on Monday. And what I'm asking you today to, if you would just review that, or if you have any questions about it, it's very simple, it's very I think concrete and direct, and what we need is the board's approval today, because by state personnel laws, we are obligated, you as the board with us are obligated to give each employee who's going to be rifted a letter. And in that letter, if you look at the bottom of the first page, we do give each employee an explanation of why they are being rifted. Of course, all final payroll details, exit interview notification, and release of information, where if they think they're going to apply for another job, they can go ahead and have that set up so there's no questions if they seek employment in the future. And on the second page, if they are a career status employee, they will actually have appeal rights to any decision at that point in time. So we would like to ask that this be voted on and approved, or I'll be more than glad to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
I have one question, Christine. On the top of the policy procedure for the RIF plan for the board, it says the latest review date is 7/17/2013. And on the right-hand side, it says the latest revision date. Should that, there was no changes made to this plan. This is the existing plan as it was in 2004.
It is. I do not know of anything. The only thing Nancy told me, which was not entered into the policy, was one-page retention. So that probably is an error in date. I think Chuck, we should correct that.
Change that.
The only revision was moving up the dates.
Moving the date.
About the next review itself.
Okay. So there was a change to the policy.
Just the, at the top, the body was not changed.
The body was not
At
changed.
the top, with the.
This
move up
this
to the
becomes
review
part
dates.
of it, so that should be a revision to the policy.
Okay, it should be. It should be an attachment to that. And we can make that adjustment.
Okay. All right, that's all the question I have.
All right, thank
Any
you.
questions from the board? Hearing none, is there a motion that we approve the RIF plan, the policy and procedure for reduction in RIF plan for Western Highlands?
So moved.
Mike, is there a second? Second. Any other questions from the board? Anyone on the phone have a question?
Nope, I don't.
Okay. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries.
Thank you so much.
With the change.
Thank you.
We'll certainly keep you posted as this evolves with more and more people making their choices. Steve, I think you're up next. And very thorough presentation on all the activities associated with closeout, and then that kind of works us into the next question of how do we want to deal with the employees that would be responsible for this work in terms of who is their employer going to be.
All right, thank you very much. The request was to go through a more detailed review of the closeout process. We have internally named this the closeout team, but it really is continuing the existing operations first and foremost through September 30th under normal operating conditions, and then to then make sure that we have a group of folks in place as the transition occurs and the folks start going and working with Smoky Mountain Center, that we have a group of people who are available and will stay on to assist through the closeout process. So those key individuals have been identified early on in the process and have been incentivized through bonuses and whatnot to stay on. And most of them, I think all of them, that were offered the opportunity of signing the letter through the HR process and are committed to staying through at least March of 2014. So what we do now, however, is that additional, some of the staff that will be working through the closeout will eventually transition over to Smoky Mountain Center as a normal course of business. A good example is we have folks in the claims shop who will be necessary to continue to process claims for a period of time. But when that work starts to diminish, there are 7 or 8 of those staff have been offered and accepted full-time positions with Smoky Mountain Center, and then they will transition their duties at that time. So they're not going to move exactly at October 1st. They more likely will be mid to late November is when we're expecting that the majority of the staff, and then there may be a few more that will then hang in through December. But we're hoping to, as fast as possible, to allow them to move to Smoky, because as the business moves to that side of the house, their volume is going to go up accordingly, and they need to have staff over on their side to handle that. So we'll be negotiating that transfer, but it will be an orderly process. We also have temporary staff that we have had on board. They're currently on board, and we will continue to maintain those temporary staff through this period. So we, as permanent staff move on, we will be still having folks who are temporary, and then they will be phased out when they are no longer needed. So we have put together in a couple more sessions an org chart. In addition to those staff, we have identified 3 or 4 consultants who have expertise with the CMHC MIS system, who will be under contract to assist us through to make sure that we can maintain the system and keep it going. And we figure we will need to keep the system operational all the way through this period. And it's at the end of that, there still will be a lot of data that will be in that system that is used by other staff to go back and look at records. So that we do need to maintain that system all the way through this process. And for those, we do also have a number of staff who have moved over. Some I've already started to the Smoky Mountain Center side, who we will retain as available to us as needed. Some of the programmers, some of the people who did some of the programming inside of the CMHC system, for example, will be offered or have full-time positions with Smoky, but will have access to them as needed. And that's just part of the agreement that we have going forward. So I put in here a kind of a short org chart to give you a sense of the scope of it, and then I'm going to go into each of the areas in a little more detail. But I will function as the project manager / closeout manager. And so all of the issues that need to be addressed will be funneled to me, and I will oversee the staff. I will be working and reporting with Lisa Slusher, the CFO. So any of those issues, that will be who I report to internally. So just quick look at the way it's structured is we have a finance team, claims, and encounters in one group of folks. And then on the other side is the MIS folks that will need to be available to us throughout the process to continue doing the work. And then some of the consulting resources down the middle that have been retained and are under contract to make sure that we make it through this process successfully. So I'm going to, if there's any questions there, I'm going to go and just peel down the next layer of detail just to give you a better sense of the functions, so you can understand some of the things that we will be doing on this closeout team. So on the finance side, there's a number of operational things that need to continue and will continue. We still are receiving what we call the per member per month in the 820, which is a technical transaction, but that's basically we have to, the premium payments that are coming in and reconcile those. And in that, there is a lot of retroactive issues where people retroactively Medicaid eligible, and that requires then that we then process and go back in and modify the claims that were adjudicated. So that's a big and important part. We're going to maintain the payroll through at least September, and that will be another discussion this morning. Accounts payable will continue being all the way through because we'll continue to have to pay providers and that at minimum in contractors, so that process will continue. We have an accounts receivable piece of our business as well in recouping money from providers where they have been paid and they no longer have claims. We still have to recover those funds. And then the normal scope of business around financial statements, board reporting, and this attachment W, which is a reporting package up to the state, all need to continue throughout this period of time. We'll also have some other kind of normal closeout business around the 1099s, which is our federal reporting around contractors and payments to outside entities. The W-2s for the end of the year for the staff, so that will be necessary to maintain staff in place in order to do that. And then the third one is really the big one. I'm going to circle back at the end because this is the one I talked to you about before, but our terminology is the general ledger, so it's the finance side of the house too, and the encounter claims reconciliation process. This will be the upstream reporting primarily of the Medicaid data that's in the system to the state. So I'll circle back on this one and talk a little more about it. But that will be the big process. Then we have some other closing on contracts, managing fixed assets, closing bank accounts, and then preparing and having a final audit. So that will all be on the kind of the finance, specifically on the finance side of the house. Next major process is claims management. And as I said, we'll continue to receive claims at least through December. So the normal business process is that providers have up to 90 days to submit claims. And then if there are any denials or issues on those claims, they have an additional 190 days to resolve those. So that would get us through easily into December, and then probably spillage into March. We also have, Western has 5 contracts, I believe, with hospitals who have a little longer time period. So we're going to work to try to get all the work processed as quickly as possible, get it through the system, and then encourage the providers to get that information to us. So during this period of time, we'll continue all the operations of there where we have processing electronic claims, keying in of paper claims, all the way through and until they're all processed. And then we have these CRIs, requests for claims resolution issues that need to be addressed. We're processing quite a number of those right now. So those have to all be handled. That's kind of also where it's even above and beyond the appeals process, where the providers can come and say, we want you to look at these claims and try to resolve them. So all that plus the normal claims adjudication will continue on all the way through this period of time. Then of course, writing the checks, processing refunds and credits, and the plan with the staff, depending on how the workflow works. As we finish the claims side of the house, we do anticipate those skills would be transferable to the encounter reporting side of the house. So we'll take some of those folks and move them to that side to perhaps accelerate the next thing I'm going to talk about. But we do have to, probably most important is finish the claims process and pay the providers first and foremost. Get that process done. The encounter reporting is twofold. There's the single stream or processing that has been going on, but we have this very large process of the Medicaid claims that need to be processed and sent up to the state. And we talked a little bit about that, and I'm going to touch at the very end. I'll touch on that one more time. But just to make it clear, none of those Medicaid claims have gone upstream at this point in time. So none of that data has gone to the state. So we have to go all the way back to January of 2012 and pull that data out, prepare it, and send it up to the state. So that process is going to be started probably in the month of August. Certainly by this time next month, we're hoping that that process will be going. But then we have to do it all the way back, and we're going to go month by month through that process. So we also have the ongoing functions there of, we get daily feeds of eligibility data, third-party liability data that needs to be processed into the system as part of the claims adjudication process. And we have direct data entry claims and the reconciliation of the three-way claims, which is just a nuance. It's just a very manual, it's a more manual process. All of those things will still be staffed. then the encounter reporting piece is just the ending piece will be the actual production of what we call the 837, which is a claims file that will go to the state. Talk about that. We will probably do minimal denial management, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end here. What I mean by that is the state agreement to accept what we send up as data. So that takes care of that counter reporting. That actually is going to be the big one. And then I'll just loop on to MIS operations. We will continue to do essentially all the normal work that is done around all the file transactions, receiving claims, processing claims, remittance advices, all of those things, backups. We have to have help desk support. All of those things will still be in place. We have a large amount of the processing requires that we extract data out of the system, do special management of that data, and then put it back into the system. So all of those functions are now covered through the closeout team, and will stay intact all the way through. And so then the final, as I said, the production of encounter claims for IPRS is one big process. That has been going on. That will continue to go on until it's finished. And then the really large process is the final encounter claims for Medicaid and getting that processed out and up to the state. And then just from my perspective, from a project management point of view, just overseeing all of these pieces and parts, interacting with any other parts of the organization that we need. For example, we still have provider network issues. We have utilization management and authorization issues that we need to engage with them to resolve problems. So I will be the oversight of that, figure out who in the organization we need to get issues resolved. And then constantly monitoring and reporting on the status of where we are, and just keep that process going. We have started this problem resolution process, which has actually been quite helpful, where we have identified, I think at this point, as of this morning, I had 20 items on that list, where we have identified a problem that needs to be addressed, and we have, to use a clinical term, a multidisciplinary team. So the team itself all comes into the room on a periodic basis, and we simultaneously resolve it, which has been very powerful, because we've now been able to identify some of the system issues and some of the business process breakdowns. And by doing that, we're really actually improving some of the processing as we go. That's not necessarily our intent, but where we can do that, we're definitely going to do it, make it more efficient and process things a little more quickly. And then we've already had a couple of cases where we have written up communications to go out to the P&L to communicate to providers to help them. And I think I mentioned in the previous presentation, one of the things from the closeout team's perspective we're trying to do is identify problems that providers may have when they transition to Smoky Mountain Center, and try to get to them ahead of that so they can fix those issues. We're now in the last 60 days of that process, so we've got about 60 more days to say, we're going to go ahead and process for you, but if this goes to Smoky, you're not going to get your claims through, to try to stop that, to try to minimize as much of that as possible. So, and from just communications to the providers, the first line of defense will follow the existing process that providers have been using in the claims department. I will be the next point of escalation, and that can go from phone calls to meetings to whatever. And then finally, if I can't resolve the issue or it's beyond my capabilities, then I'll be working with Lisa to help us resolve any of those issues. So that's my role. And then just to, kind of just review one more time the time and why it takes so much time. Again, from July through September, it's pretty much normal operations anyway. starting in October, we will have a few things that will drop off, but we are fully anticipating at least October and November, we'll have normal or pretty heavy claims volume. We do expect it will start to taper off, but we also know that we have a lot of providers who are submitting old claims for resolution on a daily basis here now. In the last 3 months, we have been inundated with requests, those CRI requests. So we hopefully at that point, those will all start to diminish by the end of December. That's what we're hoping for. And then we also will be able to quickly put it in or finish the IPRS or upstream state reporting early on. That will then get us, so we'll narrow the staffing down as each of these things happen. And then from January to March, then it's really closing down those claims processing and really gearing up all of the upstream reporting to the state. So that's kind of how we're anticipating this. We are very hopeful that we will have no new claims after March 31st, that we will actually have a stop point, everything will be in the door, and then we just have to do the final reporting of what's left. And that'll be the period from March to June, and that's when we really hope to have all of these things that I talked about, all these reporting requirements done, and then we'll just simply be preparing for a financial report out at the end of the final audit. And the very last slide, it was just the timeline, just to kind of visually show you that a lot of these things are running in parallel up into through March, and then then it will really taper off. So I just want to give you an update on, from the last time I spoke about this. I think we had mentioned that we had gone, Brian and I had made a visit to Raleigh, and we had met with the state staff and had proposed a solution of how we could resolve the Medicaid upstream reporting issue. And pleased to report that we now have a letter, so it is now in writing, that we have been, essentially they accepted our proposal, and that we will be able to send to them an extract in the process at this time. We are not requesting significant work be done to these claims to ensure they pass in counter edits and audits. So that's the big one. So essentially, it turns out exactly as I mentioned it before. So when we send those claims up, they will either be accepted or be denied, but they will be up there and they will tie to exactly what we paid to those providers. So in there's a lot of little moving parts around voids and reprocessing and some other things, but by and large, we'll have an accounting process that will control the claims process. So at the end of the day, we'll be able to show with quite a bit of precision what we paid out for Western Highlands and the data that the state will have about those claims. So that is the end result. That is the major goal at the end of this process once we get through all the normal processing. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions.
I feel confident, not just the statement, I feel confident hearing the detail that you've gone into to explain it to us, that it's going to be,
To me, that is the plan. So.
And the other, and we, for your benefit, there was a lot of discussion about this on Monday. And the thing that I always like to remember to add is you have the benefit of all my worry about all of this. See, this isn't your problem, you know, it's my problem. So, you know, obviously we put a lot of effort into doing what needs to be done. And I have to say to you, you know, with all due respect, this is a very, very fragile part of the Western operations. And it takes great care. And it's exceptionally labor intensive. This is not much like other processes that you would normally see like this. So it's we sort of say, you know, we've got all of this in a glass box, and I just try not to touch any of it, and just keep it all going. So, all right. Well, this kind of, and again, we blend now back into the HR part of it. you heard all of that. And at various times, Steve has made reference to the employees, and some would actually transition over to Smoky as this kind of ramps down. And, you know, some decision needs to be made around how we will treat the employees that will be dedicated to this closeout activity beginning October 1st. And there's a sheet, 2 pages in your packet. And again, we had a lot of discussion about this on Monday, and I think we got to a point where it became pretty obvious what would be the best thing. And really, I know you'd asked me, Chuck, about what needs action. I think we would really get ourselves out of sync if we didn't have a decision about this today because of the RIF plan. And see, all of these things are really interrelated. So people have had a chance to look at that, or you have any questions. I mean, it really boils down to just what we said. They have to be employees of either Western or Smoky. You know, if they were Western employees, you would have to have all the back office associated with having employees, which is not small. And, you know, as your CEO, I would tell you that's not a good idea at all. It just isn't.
We don't have a lot of back office, do we?
You have to have it.
No, we don't. No,
Right.
we don't have a lot of back office capacity.
Yeah, I mean, there's really, the way to do this is just contract with Smoky to do all of this, and then it makes it easier because we can hire the people just as we are with all the rest, and when they, you know, there wouldn't be any real transition. The people that were going to go over to work to Smoky would just change their activities. I mean, it's just way cleaner and better way to do it. I think that's option B. And again, I don't know, you know, as a board, how you process things or vote, or if this is a decision the board makes, or whatever you need to do. And I'm sorry if it feels a little awkward, but, you know, Charlie.
I'm prepared to recommend that on the Western Highlands proposed plan for closeout activities, that we approve number 3, option 2, with the employees becoming employees of Smoky.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion by the board? Anything on the phone? Got any comments? Okay. Hearing none, is there a motion that we approve? Joe made the motion. We got a second. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Like sign. Hearing none, motion carried. That will be option, item 3, option 2.
Great.
Brian, one other thing on this, you know, obviously you're still learning this board, we're learning you. Anything else along this area that you think where you're kind of going, wow, should I mention it? Should I? You know, again, we're learning each other. And do you feel like you have the tools that you need to okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And again, it's helpful to use the group, the transition team group.
Good.
You know, we met with Monday where, you know, we just went down every kind of possible permutation of this, and everybody went away pretty confident with knowing, you know, which way we ought to go with this.
Good. Yeah, I just want to make sure you feel comfortable.
Yep.
You have the authority, the votes,
Yep.
you know, the
Yep.
clarity to proceed with what you feel is best.
Yeah, I do.
Good.
Thank you
Good.
for asking. Senate Bill 208, boy, this is a huge piece of legislation for the state of North Carolina, and it is especially relevant to Smoky and Western. They could have just about named this after us, I think. And let me just kind of orient you to this. I would say that on the part of the General Assembly, in some sectors there is a degree of frustration with the Department of Health and Human Services and the Secretary around the accountability and authority over oversight of the MCOs. And in particular, the performance and when that performance is not good enough, and doing something about it. And this is Western, okay? And there's a piece of Mecklenburg in here too. And if you're a legislator, you know, you say, well, if you're not gonna do what I think you already have the authority to do, and I can't motivate you to do this, I'm gonna legislate more. I'm gonna make it more and more clear what the role and responsibility, authority and accountability is for this. And that's really how this bill got started. So the whole first part of it has to do with the requirements. You know, all the language is very strong in here around the requirements, accountability, authority for the secretary to basically give either a passing or a failing grade to MCOs. And the criteria for that and the process, you know, for doing that, which is just much more explicit than what existed before, so that there'd be absolute clarity around that. And then, given that there's expected to be situations where MCOs do not pass, for whatever reason, and it's interesting that there's a caveat really over performance or for any other reason, you know, what is the process then going to be for dealing with and again, the language is non-compliant MCO. So it's kind of all that we've done is now being organized in legislation and was actually ratified. You know, how is the assignment done? What's the process? What's the procedure? And then what are the rules that are associated with that kind of going forward? What happens to the money? You know, big questions that without this kind of guidance, you know, there would be a lot more negotiation and discussion and really lack of clarity around. So they framed up a lot of issues in relationship to this whole process, believing that, you know, there will be other situations like this and there better be some more explicit guidance around how all of this should be done. And again, this is kind of the General Assembly saying, look at, you know, we're giving you the cookbook now. So, did I cover that pretty well in here? Okay. A guy that knows something about this. So we're probably not going to talk too much about the first part of this, around the performance part of it, since that has, you know, not a lot of relevance to where we are now. Of course, going forward it will. And they already had, and I saw the notice came out from the secretary, everybody passed in August, so there's no announcements of any terminations. Of course, going forward, what we'll do for our board is kind of provide some feedback that's very consistent with that criteria to say, here's how we're doing. But more of what we need to talk about today has to do with that kind of going forward process and merger. And because that so much informs our merger agreement. So between Allison and Tara, they can kind of give you a little more information about that.
Hi. Y'all have in your materials both an actual copy of the Senate Bill 208 and also a summary of 208. A couple of changes to that based upon a bill that Chuck mentioned earlier, the 399. But as Brian said, the first page really of the summary I'm not going to focus on, just because that is the Secretary's obligation to authority certification, and that does not apply to us in terms of our discussion about the consolidation of the entities. Although some of the other language in there does define a lot of this. Specifically, with regard to the addition of counties to the LME, the heading is the bottom of page 2, but let's go on to page 3. Under the statute, LMEs can add counties to their existing catchment area by a resolution by a majority of the members of the LME board, instead of by agreement of a majority of the existing member counties. That is different than it was previously. Previously, it would have been every single county within the catchment area would have to vote, and it have to be a majority of those. And instead, they changed that to a majority of the actual members of the LME board. Secretary approval is required for any county withdrawal from a LME and for dissolution of an LME. Any fund balance that is available to the LME at the time of its dissolution that's not utilized to pay liabilities shall be transferred to the area authority contracted to operate the Medicaid waiver in the catchment area of the dissolved area authority. If the fund balance transferred from the dissolved LME is insufficient to constitute 15% of the anticipated operational expenses arising from the assumption of responsibilities from the dissolved LME, the Secretary shall guarantee the operational reserves for LME assuming responsibilities under the 1915 BC waiver until the assuming LME has reestablished 15% of operational reserves. So that indicates specifically what fund balance is required to do with regard to an LME that's going to be assigned or dissolved, as well as give some guarantee in terms of reserves that the department has some obligations there in terms of guaranteeing that.
Let me just hop in right there, because that's a big issue that, you know, at different times has come up. We talked about it in relationship to the encounters and what kind of liability the counties could have. You don't have any. It's real simple. This defaults back to the Secretary. There's no discussion in the bill at all around county liability for basically financial failure of the MCO. Now, the other side of that coin is you don't get any money back either. Okay? You know, all the assets go to the compliant, I guess we should use the right language, the compliant MCO. There's no dissolution. And again, that's something that Western, you know, the various counties that have come into Western, you've dealt with that, and we still have a piece of that hanging out. So all of that goes away. It's really cleaned up.
And further, LMEs that add one or more counties to existing catchment areas must ensure that the expanded catchment area is represented through membership on the area board. You'll see I've italicized this, with or without adding area board members. The very first bullet point under the board composition, the next thing, where I indicate that there was no change to the board composition requirement, that is true within House Bill 208, and there is no change to what the criteria will be in terms of the total number of members and so on. However, it will not apply to us until such time as 30 days after the merger or realignment agreement is effective, or by April 1st of 2014. So it's still the same numbers, still the same criteria and so on. However, either organization is going, neither board is going to have to reconstitute itself by October 1 and then reconstitute again for purposes of this consolidation.
And that is significant because that is one of the requests that we made to the state, so that you wouldn't have board changes and we could have stability and transition through the process. So our recommendation and our legislation was approved.
And as I said, that was not contained in House Bill 208. That's in 399 that Chuck referenced earlier, his report. Then also there is a new county commissioner advisory board.
Before we go to that,
Sure.
we back up a little bit. Okay, so thinking about the end game, how many counties will we have?
23,
Okay, so
maximum of 21
so
members on the
Mitchell
board.
and Henderson will be represented on the new board. So, okay, how does that work out?
Well, I think that, and I don't know, I was not part of the
I'm just
creation of
asking
the
for your
legislation.
thoughts.
The criteria are the criteria that were adopted last year in the legislation last year. And so you've still got the 21-member board, and you've still got the specific individuals to fill certain slots. And so obviously, certainly Smokey knew even before there was going to be any consolidation that pretty much it was not going to be possible for every county of those 15 counties to be able to be on the board and be represented. And that certainly would appear to be the case since there are going to be 23 counties and 21 member slots. That being said, there is the County Commissioner Advisory Board that I mentioned. And so I think that's an attempt by the by the houses of the legislature to basically allow for some representation, some ability to have some impact with regard to decisions made by the board. It provides that each county will appoint a member to the advisory board, and the advisory board has some functions, but at least will be able to, I guess,
Well,
advise.
and Steve, I think that's part of, from the, working with the County Commissioner Association, was the way of trying to look at systemically the issues that get raised by the counties, and looking at that County Commissioner Advisory Board as a way of handling that, rather than county by county by county.
When would that go into effect?
This goes,
30 days after.
30 days.
The County Commissioners Advisory Board?
no, the county,
Actually,
that's, I believe, October 1.
Yeah, if you look at board composition, it says 10-1, but I wasn't sure what that applied to.
I believe that.
I would interpret that that's really just part of the whole governance change, to be honest with you. I don't know that would make much sense to do short of that wholesale change. Because that was, I mean, this was, I mean, you know how legislation's done. You know, this was the compromise to say, okay, you know, we're not going to change the governance bill. We're not opening that up, but we'll let this be a kind of an add-on that provides, you know, some specific way for counties to be engaged.
on the, you have a copy in your packet of Bill 208, and on page 6 of that bill, the secretary had to do the initial compliance by August 1, section 4, which is, becomes effective January 1, and the rest of the bill goes into effect immediately. So it looks as if the County Commissioner Advisory Board should actually start getting in place immediately.
That's what I want to know. So we need to basically communicate to our boards, draw straws, and the odd man out loses, right? And have that, get that up and running by October, maybe. That gives you like a couple months to.
All right, I've been communicating with somebody from the Secretary's office on kind of what our status is with all of this, and I basically have told them that it's all on hold pursuant to, 334 or whatever. So we got some wiggle room here. I think especially over the, the County Advisory Board. Tara's given you the right answer technically. What I'm telling you is, I think functionally, it's kind of a non-issue. I mean, at some point, the law is the law. And, we're going to get there. And whatever planning you want to do around two things, okay? It is the overall consolidated entity board. That's a 21-member board, okay? With all the criteria, it's very explicit around that membership. So it's the establishment of that, and it's the establishment of that County Commissioner Advisory Board. See, I see those two as going hand in hand.
I think so too, and as you know, obviously the County Commissioner Advisory Board will be 23 members. And one of the specifically articulated directives towards that board is that it will be the Chief Advisory Board regarding delivery of services for MH, IDD, SA in the catchment area. So that's all right.
So the County Commissioners Advisory Board, what, they'll meet like Friday next week or something, is that what you're saying? Well, what I'm going to have to do is obviously communicate to our folks to get ready. You're going to have to find somebody. I don't know who that's going to be. But they need to hear that from us before they, read about it in some newsletter someplace. So Monday, I'm going to tell my board that they're going to have to come up with somebody. And there will be a meeting called sometime, but we don't know when that is.
Well, and again, think of it this way. There's two dates. there is within a month of the merger. And what I'm going to say to you at some point is, we're starting on that merger agreement this afternoon. There's no, and I think if your thinking is caught up to this, there's no good reason for Western to continue on in more of a, I don't, marginalize isn't a good word, but it kind of ends up being, you become minimized and probably feel vulnerable, okay?
There's no
And-
value to that.
Yeah.
I mean, there just
And,
is.
yeah, and the easiest way to stop that is to just make it part of the whole. Then all the responsibilities that were Western become the responsibility of the whole. And that's really the tipping point we're at, to be honest with you. And that's why I emphasize to you, I'm your CEO. Nobody worries about this more than I do. This isn't a Western problem anymore. It's a me and basically this consolidated entity problem. I mean, in so much as any of these are problems. So, that merger really is, flips the switch to the board changes because of basically the waiver legislation that we got complements a Ralph Heiss. And what I'm saying is, as soon as that goes into effect, if it's merger or April 30th, I guess. April 1st, the same thing for that county commissioner advisory board. So think of those as hand in hand, okay?
I guess fine.
And the
But I have to explain that to them.
Yes. And the legislation did get changed that the merger can happen at any time during the year and not just at the fiscal year, which is what it used to be.
Right.
So we don't have to wait until July 1st or June 30th. But obviously, hand in hand with that, and as the agreement is drawn up, we'll want to be aware and certainly will provide consultation and assistance in terms of each of the counties will have to have a resolution that is adopted and also a hearing with 10 days notice for you to leave Western Highlands, even though it's got to be dissolved separately. That's part of the statutes. That is not changed.
Tara, question, if I may please, of you, just to make sure we're looking in on the same page. The new structure of the board of law that was passed said that at least one member was a current county commissioner. Would it be advisable, or would you, when you pull the 23 county commissioners together, that's going to make up the advisory board, that they elect one of those members on that advisory board to be the appointee to the other board?
I think there would be some merit to that, just from stability
And the
and
fact that they-
understanding.
And when their conversations would be able to be reported from the full gamut of all 23 counties, instead of we put another county commissioner over there that's not aware of what the advisory board's doing. I would think that the selection for that purpose should come from that advisory board.
That would certainly have some continuity.
And, I mean, obviously, that's going to be up to everyone making up the decisions, but,
Right there.
Well,
it's a, I mean,
That's up to you.
it's a
That's
rotating
really up to the counties.
sort of a representation.
We ought to
I mean, it makes
videotape
sense.
those meetings.
Oh, I'm sure that'll be taken care of.
You think they cuss now, what do you think? Any other questions?
This is not, I don't think this will be the last time we talk about this. And there's a lot here to absorb, but this is at least, again, for the purposes of framing that merger agreement, this really gets us down the road on a lot of it.
And my feeling with the merger agreement is we need to expedite the process on that. Steve has a question for you.
Or maybe Sonia, but our current terms, where are we as far as these folks here, current terms? When do they expire?
Not until we're finished. So with the change that they made to adjust here, we remain intact until everything is
Okay,
done.
so all of that is basically moot.
Yes. For these board members right now,
So
until
November 1st,
everything
we
is done.
would normally have people rotating.
So if the counties that my point is this, the counties those people come from, do they need to do something?
Not at this moment. What they will need to do as we figure out, determine when the merger date will be effective, once we get the whole agreement done, consolidation date, there will need to be resolutions from the counties relating to leaving the.
Yeah, I'm with that, but I
and-
think just the people here.
Okay.
Because remember, and also, this gets complicated, one of the issues we have is liability insurance. And then you're covered by the liability of the counties. So my thought is, if we've got people, regardless of all this, that were appointed by a county for a date certain, should they not be, that before that happens, they should be reappointed to another, maybe a very short window, but they would be covered from a liability standpoint, and also that county would have that person appointed.
Right, in the clerk to the board, the previous was kept that information, so I'll have to get with Sonia.
Just think about that, because I
Yeah.
don't need to know today, but we need to find that out.
Just
if
be
that
sure
makes
you're
sense.
protected.
Need to extend us out, because October is the next change through, and before we get to, hopefully, if the merger agreement and all that stuff gets done, we get all that done by October 1st, then that would be a moot issue at that point. But yet, we would need to have the county board look at it at least in September, to extend it to December, or to extend it to that, the following June timeframe number, when we're going to be paid by.
With the outcome being that the 393 allowance that gives your
Right.
boards to stay intact, you use that as your authority
Right.
to,
Yeah, right.
it overrides any other statutes.
Good.
Thank you. I think you work with something.
And I would like to go back and revisit the two motions that Steve White made. I miscalculated the numbers because you had left the room. I would like to, with the board's permission, have you go back and reconsider both the yellow sheet and the green sheet, and let's have those repeated, because I think we dropped below our 9 members.
I think we
Not
did.
11.
I counted her as an A, though.
Right. And it's a good thing I'm not a CPA, because I miscounted. So it's my error, and I apologize.
All right, move to seal the minutes for closed session just completed, and withhold those minutes for public inspection as long as public inspection would frustrate the purpose or purposes thereof.
And need a second for that.
Got a motion to a second?
Second.
Any other questions? All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Motion carried.
Move to approve minutes for March 12th special meeting, July 11th special meeting.
Got a motion to a second to approve the minutes for March the 12th and July the 11th?
Second.
Second. Any other questions? All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you, and I'm sorry.
All right, let's try to do E real quick here, Allison, about
Yes.
the guardianship changes, and then we'll do C, wrap things up.
Some of you may be aware that last year there were changes to the guardianship law that actually were very confusing to a lot of folks. I know that there are a lot of issues that came up with care coordination and certainly in CFAC and so on, because it limited situations in which there could be a provider for a consumer as well as being a legal guardian for that consumer. In a lot of situations, we had seen where that was a dual role and getting paid for both. The law last year changed it so that although parents could continue to be who were also providers, could continue to be the legal guardian, that other family members, unless they were already a legal guardian, had been appointed as legal guardian as of January 1 this year, 2013, then they could no longer be both. They had to choose whether they would be a provider or a legal guardian. This also went to not just family members and so on that were legal guardians who were providers, but a lot of other organizations. I know that, for example, ARC, Haywood County, they provide some services, obviously, and there were a lot of folks there that were serving as legal guardians. But under the statute, that was no longer legal. It caused a lot of problems. And so that got changed this year, so some of those things have been addressed, and there is a copy of the law, House Bill 543 in your materials, as well as a summary of this that I prepared. And basically, the big things are that obviously, parents can still be a legal guardian and provide services, no problem. However, a member of the ward's immediate family, and this definition is much broader than it was before, which includes spouse, child, sibling, parent, grandparent, grandchild, step-parent, step-children, step-siblings, or adoptive relationships. Any of those can be a legal guardian and provider, or a licensed family foster care provider, or a licensed therapeutic foster care provider who was under contract to provide services with the LME, and who was serving as a guardian in that capacity as of January 1, 2013. And so it expands it. It's not just the immediate family members. That was a very small number of people. And this is something that can be retroactive. So if someone gave up the guardianship during this past year because of that previous law, they can become the guardian again, which will address a lot of concerns. Obviously, there's requirement that they be reappointed as guardian, but still, it is something that I think will be of help. And then biologically unrelated individuals who were serving as of March 1 of this year may be a guardian without compensation for guardianship services. So they wouldn't be able to get paid for that, but they could still, say if you've got an individual who works for a provider or whatever, who also wants to be the guardian, they would still be able to do that, get paid as a provider, but not for the guardianship services, as long as they were doing that as of March 1 of this year. And these are some bullet points because there were just a lot of questions last year, and these address some of these. This applies to co-guardians as well as guardians, so if the co-guardian does not meet these provisions, it's the same result.
So a separate entity that is set up specifically to provide guardianship and no other services would be okay?
Would be fine. This only applies if you've got a provider as guardian. And as you may recall, LMEs had to transition out of being guardians a few years ago. And then like this past year, I know a lot of the, some of the big providers like Daymark and others ended up having to transition their guardianship. And one of the problems we found was that a lot of the smaller providers had not really been aware of this, found out that they were in violation, and there was a lot of questions around that. So this was an attempt, I believe, to try and address that. Any other questions? This is something we'll certainly be providing education to our care coordinators on, making sure that people are well versed in this to make sure that we can.
I think the previous law was an example of unintended consequences.
I think you're right. I think you're right. All right. Thank you.
Great. Policy changes. Glad we saved a full 2 hours here for this part of the discussion. Jerry, you might want to change your tape so you get ready. This is going to take a while.
It's a never-ending tape.
There's not really tape in there. Okay, just really.
Hold on.
He has a photographic memory.
Yeah, that's it. Well, the deeper we get into this, the more you can see for yourself the differences in terms of how we do business and how that contrasts with Western. I think this agenda item in particular has to do with meetings I've had with almost all the counties at this point talking about network management and the smoky philosophy around use of state and county funds and how we really leverage as much service capacity as we can, especially when it relates to indigent care. And our ability as a managed care organization to have tools that counties don't to accomplish that. And generally speaking, that has to do with service mix and payer mix. And our effort to get providers to do things that they don't make any money on, and really, in fact, we know they lose money on, by balancing that with ways that we can either provide stipends, enhance rates, or give them books of business that are more profitable. And that's what we do. We are your agents for doing that. It's great that counties have taken such an active role in doing that. In fact, but there are ways that we can do that better. Let's just put it that way. So a lot of the efforts have been around going out and talking with folks around that, and also explaining, a little bit more about this comprehensive provider model, which is, in my way of thinking, the reestablishment of a community mental health center. That, for any of us that kind of grew up in community mental health over the last 20 or 30 years, that was really the venue for the delivery of most of the care in outpatient settings. And I think what the point of evolution that we're in North Carolina now is trying to reestablish that. And our effort around that really has to do with this model that vests a lot of clinical resource in one organization and knits the crisis continuum right into that. The only way to accomplish that is through change. And that's created some angst on the part of providers and others around, what is that going to mean to me, my agency, the way we do business, et cetera, et cetera. And I think you remember our discussion around how basically from July 1st to October 1st, we're just kind of rolling forward with the Western contracts for state and Medicaid, and then October 1st we would begin to change that. And we made a couple of decisions. We basically met with providers to let them know about those changes in the last week. So you're going to hear about or feel the effect of some of those changes. Probably the largest of which has to do with a decision to no longer contract with NC Mentor for mobile crisis management and to move that contract to RHA. For all the reasons that I've talked about, it vests in them the majority of the crisis continuum, and it ties that to outpatient care. So it gives us an ability to kind of get ahead of this by providing greater access, and then if someone does evolve into a crisis situation, a better remediation of all of that. So that's kind of like a flare that's gone up there. A little bit also with October Road and some of the northern counties around some outpatient treatment that they did on a fee-for-service basis that, I said to them, it might not feel like it, but, I'm really the provider's best friend here, because we're not going to set providers up in a way that is not going to be financially viable and ultimately is not going to be in the best interest of clients. And that's on some days, that's a bitter pill. But that's the responsibility that we have to make sure that ultimately we're getting the best treatment value and outcomes for clients. If you just kind of always orient it back to that, that at least helps clear up the thinking. We can't do that without providers, and we have a very strong relationship with them. But there are going to be kind of more situations probably where we refine this approach and just can't spend the money in the same way that Western had, which was very, very broadly distributed. So, in a nutshell, that's probably what that agenda item meant. And, I'll continue to stay in touch with you. And, we've started this kind of round of meetings, and, we'll keep that up. Okay? Any questions?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for the board, Brian, if there are, and I hate to think in terms of winners and losers, but there really are. And I think when it gets down to the consumer level, for the board to hear what that process is, who's going to be affected, what kinds of consumers are going to be affected, so that when we get the calls, because we probably won't hear about the winners, but we will hear about somebody who was receiving it. I've heard about, the new entity is not going to provide developmental therapy to people with developmental disabilities. It's all going to be another service that is less, comprehensive maybe and whatnot. So if we could hear about those things so that
Absolutely.
we can be prepared to kind of give the rationale behind it, then I think that would be extremely
Yeah,
helpful.
I'm all for that. Now, that's why, I made a point of talking about these two decisions. I mean, we literally had the meetings with providers this week to talk about that, and RHA is here today and, working very actively on that transition. I don't know, Christina, are there any other decisions or changes are so minor that they don't come to mind, to my mind anyway? At least around providers, not services. In your reference, I'm just not clear on, Christina.
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any other really very specific things. I mean, RHA and Mentor are meeting. They're going to meet weekly. Brian has requested, even with us as the MCO, a weekly meeting, so we are tracking and we are down in the weeds of the transitions, the models, the communication. One of the things I think might be important to the board that we got told very clearly that the number for mobile crisis had been established for 7 years. No one's going to touch that phone number. That phone number will remain as it is so that communities will always know the same number. I mean, it's those kind of nuances we are down in. I think as what is going on between the two agencies within the clinical world and the service world is what we call a benefit plan, which is where you look at all the benefits and, either what Western Highlands has done, maybe they did some other things we didn't do and vice versa for various reasons, maybe actual consumer and families' needs. And so this week there was probably over 8 to 10 hours put into meetings, and they've been doing this for the last 12 weeks to really get this benefit plan completely established, to look at any of the nuances. And of course, from a management team perspective, one of the first things we want to know is, in that combination of those two benefit plans, does it affect a person? Is it going to change somebody's plan? Is it going to change a contract for a particular provider? So I think we can come back next month and give you an overview of that, if that would be your pleasure.
Yeah, or an individual person or a group of consumers that a specific service is not going to be, because those are the calls that we're going to get.
Sure.
And MOE calls.
Absolutely. And I would just say also, the other part of that question is, does the rate change?
Yes.
So it's always about the person and what they're going to get, or the question of that. And I will just like to say that there have been concerns, and majority of the things that I have followed up on, and I'm so sorry for consumers and families that a lot of the information is incorrect or not yet decided.
Yeah.
And so we would truly, love to have an opportunity to share whatever you'd like of that.
Yeah, that's what really bothers us, because I hope you see this for yourself. We work very hard to just really get facts out there and explain things, and I like to say, nothing should come as a surprise. You might not like it, but you'll understand why we did what we did. There'll be some logic to it, and we'll keep people informed. So, when it gets twisted up, that never makes us very happy.
Right.
So, okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time will be the Chief Financial Officer report. Ms. Luster, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to report out on 3 areas today. One of them is the year-end financial statements for 12/13, and year-end, of course, is June 30. We haven't produced those financial statements yet. We are still working to ensure that we have confidence in the estimation that we're making for the claims or services that have been provided but not yet billed to Western Highlands. We have all the Medicaid paid claims data. We're trying to analyze that. We're also using authorizations for certain services because, again, we want to come up with a good estimate before we close the books at year-end. We've spoken about this before, and it's commonly called the IBNR, incurred but not reported. It impacts your expenses and liability, and again, we want to make sure we've got a sound estimate before we close the books. One of the things that's impacting the IBNR, there's a process at Western Highlands where providers can request reconsideration of claims that they've submitted that haven't been paid. Steve referred to it earlier, the CRI, Claims Resolution Inquiry. So I believe since April, since the announcement of the termination of the contract, we've paid out in those 90 days since around the end of April over $2 million in claims that are a result of those claims inquiries. I think what's happened once the announcement was made of the termination of the contract, providers
have felt a need to rush to get claims issues resolved. So claim staff are working on that. It's a very labor-intensive process, but they're turning those around as quickly as they can. So hopefully in about 2 weeks, we will finalize the year-end financial statements and we'll be able to present those. Another area I want to report out on are the three-way hospital inpatient payments. Those are contractual arrangements between Western Highlands, a hospital, and the Division of Mental Health. Western Highlands has 3 of those contracts, Submission, Part D, and Rutherford. Typically what happens is those hospitals bill the LME, you have to bill upstream to the division, then the division pays the LME, and then the LME pays the hospital. The division is not always able to pay those claims quickly back to the LME, and it creates a very long delay in getting the hospitals paid. Sometimes it may be as long as 6 months since they billed. And as you can imagine, that's not very popular with the hospitals. So we made the decision here at Western Highlands last week that we're going to start paying those claims before Western Highlands gets paid. So we're going to go back, identify all the outstanding three-way claims, go ahead and pay those 3 hospitals, and then in the future, as we receive those claims, we will pay them as they come in. We'll also send out a communication to the hospitals so they'll be aware of this change too. So we will start doing that the first of next week and get those payments out. One other update I want to give today is just on the Medicaid claims, and there was a handout in your packet called Item 2, and that was in there really just to give you an idea of the volume of claims that are processed monthly. This was the data on June 2013. There were over 82,000 Medicaid claims received in the month of June. 71,000 were approved, so when you just look at that, there's 11,000 denied. And when you think about that and all the work that goes into that just for 1 month, there are 11,000 claims that the claim staff are working on with the provider to get through the system as claimed. Again, I just wanted to highlight that so you'll understand the volume monthly, and that factors into the closeout activities that Steve talked about earlier. So that's kind of a brief report today, but that's all I have, unless there are any questions about anything in finance.
One of the things, if I could ask a question, what we've called the three-way beds with the hospitals, I'm delighted to hear that you're going to take care of the hospitals financially, because that's another thing that we rely on. They're a lifesaver, and they can't be waiting for their money. But will there be something like that after the consolidation? Will there be something akin to three-way beds?
Yeah, really what Lisa explained to you as the change in policy here at Western is, you know, again, we talked about the difference between Western and Smoky. That was the Smoky policy that we pay in advance. And there's a lot of relevance here, especially with Mission Hospital right next door, that was very vocal around the problems they had with payment, and in fact, actually had lobbied the state to be paid directly. And I guess given our presence and this change in policy, I think it's going to go back to us being paid. So we're very, very sensitive to those issues. In fact, I met with some folks over there, you know, this week, and Steve Wood did, to, you know, really, you know, reassure them, you know, back to this whole claims processing piece that had been, you know, very challenging for Western. Right next door, you know, they felt that a lot. So this is a big area that we try to make better.
Thank you.
And the current three-way contracts here at Western will just be reassigned to Smoky, so they'll stay in place with those same 3 hospitals at the same level. Anything else?
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the board committee reports. First, the executive committee, we did not meet this month, so no report there. Financial committee, Lisa just gave that, so we'll pass on that. Personnel committee, I don't believe there were any issues. Is Artie still there?
Yes, sir, I'm still here. I'll be for another 10 minutes.
Okay. Personnel committee, you got anything to bring up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Human Rights Committee?
Human Rights Committee will meet this month.
Okay. And QIC?
We're no longer meeting.
No longer meeting. Okay. All right. Are there any board member comments?
I guess I'd like to say that I feel like I'm starting to see the form of the promise of mental health reform that we started talking about in 2000. And I'm starting to see the outline of it with this transition, and it's very encouraging.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let me get overconfident. I would just like to comment to Brian and his staff, and Charlie and the Western Highlands staff that are still here working diligently to make this transition go smoothly. Thank y'all very much. The reports that we've been getting, the reports that were made today, have been most informational to all of us. It means a lot. The issue with the three-way bed, the paying them up front, is going to relieve probably one of the biggest headaches that we had. So that's good to know that we're going to do that. Steve, you got a big task, bud, and I know you're going to be up to it. I have full confidence in what you're doing there, and I think we get all this stuff resolved, we're all going to be better for it. And thank y'all very much for what you've done. Thank you for the information you provided today, and thank y'all for what you're doing every day. So if there's no other board comments, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, a motion second? Second. And let's go home. Everybody be safe going home. We're going back to work, please.